the Albanese government has released its mid-year economic figures. MyEFO, they call it. And guess what? To hear them tell the story, well, the Albanese government's doing a great job. Let's have a little listen to the Treasurer Jim Chalmers earlier today.
Now, the mid-year update that we're releasing today shows that the government has returned 92% of upward revisions to revenue since the May budget and 88% of revenue upgrades since we came to office. We have also identified almost $10 billion in savings, which means almost $50 billion in savings over the life of our government. And if you combine that with some modest tax changes, we've identified $11.6 billion in budget improvements, which total $72.7 billion since we came to office. We are not yet forecasting a second surplus, but we are within striking distance. We have given ourselves a chance, but we aren't there yet, and we've been deliberately cautious and deliberately conservative.
Oh, well done, Treasurer. A second surplus. Wouldn't that be lovely? But of course, there are a few problems with this. One big one is that all those good numbers, well, you and I, we're propping them up through really high tax takes. There's another problem too. Inflation. Remember that they predicted it would be 3.25% in 2023-24? Well, that's been revised upwards. In 2023-24, it's going to be 3.75%. Next year, down to 2.75%, and then the following 2 years, 2.5%. Well, we can trust them, of course, because even though they didn't see this coming the last time, and all the supply chain problems are mostly shook out of the system, so whatever inflation there is domestic sticky inflation, I'm sure they've got it right this time. So, what do? Well, if you're the treasurer, to solve this problem, you pump more money into the economy.
Now, we understand that Australians are doing it tough and our economy is slowing, and that's why we are rolling out tens of billions of dollars in cost of living relief.
And that's not all. There was a great pickup from Jim Chalmers at the Australian today, noting that there's nearly $5 billion more in new spending on decisions taken but not yet announced and not for publication. So all of that, plus the cost of living measures, does that lead to more inflation on the way? Well, maybe, but here is what is absolutely definitive. Middle Australia, you and me, is carrying the can for the government, which is pumping billions of extra dollars from our pockets into government coffers and then using those monies to return those to us in a surplus and through targeted cost of living measures. Now, at the same time, the other edge of the sword is that we are also being asked, those of us with mortgages, to shoulder the burden of what is now, I think, 13 interest rate rises to help fight the very inflation that the government is helping to make worse. Here's how it works. Everyone who earns a wage is right now being taxed more. Everyone who has a mortgage is paying more. This is not, as they like to say, sustainable. If the government is in clover, it's because you and me are funding it. We're making the numbers look good. Last week, the government released the latest statement of national accounts. There was some pretty interesting stuff in there. Over the previous quarter, income tax receipts rose by 6.3%. Over the year, income tax payable increased by its highest amount since the September quarter of 1977. Australian taxpayers are now paying almost as much to the government as corporations do through the company tax. And over that period, household income fell back 5.1%, the lowest, the worst performance for household income of any country in the OECD. We're feeling squeezed, we're feeling it in our pocketbooks every day. So is it any wonder that people are feeling a little stressed as we head into the holiday season? Merry Christmas indeed. And this is one of the reasons why Australians who have had inflation push them through the tax brackets as their income rises to meet the cost of living and CPI increases, well, they need to have at least some of their own money returned to them via the promised Stage 3 tax cuts. Of course, there are a lot of drivers for what's going on. One of the things which the government doesn't like to talk about is immigration. On Monday, I revealed to you how, despite claiming that they were cutting the migrant intake, the number of migrants projected by the government over the next 5 years was in fact going to jump from 1.495 million to around 1.6. Angus Taylor bailed the cat on this at his press conference today.
It's gone up to over 1.6 million now from 1.5 million in the budget. And the problem here is this. Australia is a proud immigrant nation. There's no question about that. But you've got to get the balance right between the number of people and the spend on infrastructure, the services that are required. And right now, Australians understand that that balance is wrong. We're out of whack. It is simply not working.
I got to say, the Shadow Treasurer is correct. What we have done as a nation is we have stopped investing in capital, and instead what the government is doing is using migration to prop up the overall GDP, to make it look like we're not in a recession, when in fact, on a per capita basis, we very much are. Now, I don't need to tell you that this is incredibly bad for our standard of living. By growing the population and not investing in capital, roads, schools, hospitals, we have gone backwards. And we are switching to a population-led model for growth, which means that our overall productivity has also gone backwards. In other words, we're in the middle of a great big Ponzi scheme. And we have seen just how cynical this use of immigration can be. Oh, and by the way, we are also to be expected to believe that the Albanese government will be doing everything it can to bring these new migrants into the Australian family and encourage them to take up Australian values and not just be a cog in the wheel of Jim Chalmers' great GDP expansion machine. After all, this is the same government that came to power and immediately set about dividing the nation on the basis of how far back you or I can trace our individual tenure in Australia. And they also, in the process of that, implied that modern post-settlement Australia was somehow illegitimate, or at least incomplete, without our signing a treaty with our own citizens and engaging in some sort of truth and reconciliation process. And of course, we were forced to backtrack. They were forced to backtrack when they were caught out cancelling an Australia Day party in London because, as I always say, we need to worry about our social capital as much as our economic capital.